Gracias.
We need to resolve this now.
And we will, on my terms.
They had gathered in the glass conference room to fire Tomás Reyes from the company he built, and Tomás sat quietly at the end of the table in his one good shirt. And he set down a thick manila folder with the word evidence written across it in black marker, and the room went very still. Across from him, his sister-in-law, Vanessa, had already started her speech, the one the lawyers had helped her write, about how it was time for the company to modernize, about how Tomás had served his purpose in the early years. But the numbers now told a troubling story about certain irregularities in the accounts that pointed, sadly, regrettably, to him. Beside her sat Sister Renee, nodding, and behind them stood Damon Vance in a suit that cost more than Tomás made in a month. The wealth consultant, the friend of the family, the man with the plan. They had a document ready for Tomás to sign. It removed him from the company for cause. It gave him nothing, took his name off the doors, and painted him, in careful legal language, as the reason money had gone missing. The company he built. Tomás let Vanessa finish. He had spent 30 years letting people finish, letting them underestimate him, letting them decide that the quiet man, with the calloused hands who actually built the buildings, could not possibly understand the money that flowed through them. That underestimation had cost him over and over his whole life. Today it was going to cost them. He opened the folder. He pulled out the first stack of pages, private bank account summaries with account numbers no one in that room had ever shown him, and he slid them into the middle of the table. Then a second stack, wire transfers, hundreds of thousands of dollars, moving out of the company into accounts that led back to the two people telling him he was the thief. Then a third stack, text messages, printed and dated, in which Vanessa and Damon planned this exact meeting, this exact frame, months in advance. Vanessa's face changed first. The color drained out of it, and her mouth fell open, and her hand rose slowly to cover it, because she was looking at her own texts printed on a page in her dead husband's brother's hand. Renee made a small strangled sound and grabbed her sister's arm. And Damon Vance, the smooth man, the plan man, took one step back from the table because he had built his entire scheme on a single assumption, the same assumption everyone had always made about Tomás Reyes, and he was watching that assumption detonate in real time. They had all forgotten one thing. They had forgotten that the man who builds the house knows where every nail is. How did a humble builder outmaneuver a professional con artist and the family that betrayed him? And how deep did the theft go before he caught it? You have to go back. To two brothers, a single cement mixer, and a promise made over a coffin. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever been underestimated by people who should have known better, stay with me. Because this is the story of what happens when the quiet one finally opens the folder. To understand the folder, you have to understand the two brothers, because everything good in this story and everything that was stolen came from them. Tomás and Danny Reyes came to this country as boys, sons of a bricklayer, and they learned their father's trade in their hands before they learned it in any language. They were opposites in the way that brothers often are, two halves that made one whole person. Danny was the mouth. He was charm and vision and the handshake, the one who could walk into a bank or a client's office and make people believe. Tomás was the hands. He was the one on the site at 6 in the morning, the one who could look at a crooked wall and know exactly which joist had failed, the one who actually knew how to build the thing Danny had promised. Danny used to say it himself, laughing, arm around his brother at every company party. I sell the dream. Tomás builds it. Don't ever confuse which one of us you actually need. There was a winter early on, before the company was anything, when a job went wrong and a client refused to pay, and the two brothers had a choice between cutting a corner that no inspector would ever catch or eating a loss that would wipe out everything they had saved. Danny wanted to fight the client. Tomás wanted to fix the corner properly out of their own pockets because he could not sleep in a world where a wall he built might fail with a family inside it. They ate the loss. They were nearly ruined for it. And a year later, that same client, having watched the Reyes brothers quietly bankrupt themselves rather than leave a hidden flaw in his building, sent them the biggest job they had ever gotten, and told everyone he knew that if you wanted something built that would never fail, you called the two brothers who would go broke before they'd cheat you. That was the seed of everything. Their whole company grew out of one winter when they chose the honest hard thing over the easy dishonest one, and that choice, that exact instinct, is the thing Damon Vance would fail to account for decades later. Because a man who would go broke rather than hide a flaw in a wall is not a man who will ever stop digging until he finds the flaw someone hid in his own house. They started with nothing. One used cement mixer, bought with money they saved eating rice for a year. They took the jobs no one else wanted, the small, ugly repairs, the additions, and they did them so well and so honestly that people started asking for them by name, and the small jobs became bigger jobs, and over 25 years, brick by brick, exactly the way their father had taught them. Tomás and Danny Reyes built Reyes and Reyes Construction into a real company. 40 employees, a name that meant something in the county, buildings all over the city that would outlast all of them. And they did it as equal partners, 50-50, sealed not with a contract at first, but with a handshake, because between the two of them a handshake was stronger than any contract a lawyer could write. They built more than a company. They built a family, in the old sense, the kind that a certain kind of business used to be. Reyes and Reyes took care of its people. When a worker got hurt, the Reyes brothers covered him. When a man's kid needed surgery, somehow the money appeared. The crews were loyal in a way that money cannot buy, because Tomás and Danny had earned it one decent act at a time, and the two brothers had a standing promise to every person who worked for them, a promise Danny made out loud at every Christmas party, and Tomás kept quietly all year long. As long as there's a Reyes in this company, there's a place for you here. Those men believed it. They had every reason to. And that promise, that unglamorous, unprofitable, deeply human promise, is the exact thing that Damon Vance would later look at and see as pure waste, a soft old-world sentimentality to be cut away so the numbers could finally breathe. Tomás had a daughter, Elena, his only child, the light of his life. His wife had passed when Elena was young, and Tomás had raised the girl alone, on job sites and at kitchen tables, and he had poured into her the one thing he had in abundance, which was the belief that she could be anything. Elena was sharp in a way that startled her teachers. She loved numbers the way her father loved wood and stone, and Tomás worked doubles for years to send her to school for it, and she became a forensic accountant, the kind of person whose entire job is to follow money through the lies people tell about it. Remember, Elena, she is going to matter enormously. Because the family that would try to destroy Tomás made a fatal error in their arithmetic. They counted the quiet builder as a man alone, and they never once seriously considered his daughter. Then Danny died. It was fast and it was cruel, the way it often is. A pain in his side that he ignored because he was Danny and he ignored things, and then a diagnosis, and then 4 months, and then a funeral where 400 people came because Danny Reyes had touched that many lives. Tomás gave the eulogy, though he was not a man of speeches, and he could barely get through it because he had lost not just his brother but the other half of himself, the mouth to his hands, the dream to his build. And at the graveside, Tomás made a promise over his brother's coffin, quietly, just for the two of them. He promised he would protect what they built. He promised he would take care of Vanessa and the family. He promised the workers would always have their place. He meant every word. He did not yet understand that keeping those promises would require him to survive the very people he was promising to protect. because Danny's half of the company did not stay Danny's. It passed to his widow, Vanessa. Vanessa had been married to Danny for 12 years, and she had never, not for one day, understood the company or respected the man who actually ran its work. She had loved Danny's charm and Danny's money and the life they bought, and she had always regarded Tomás as something between a servant and an embarrassment. The greasy-handed brother who showed up to family dinners smelling of sawdust and never had anything clever to say. To Vanessa, the company was not a living thing built by two men's hands. It was an asset, a number, a thing that produced money that she was now, suddenly, the co-owner of, sitting across the table from a man she considered her inferior, who somehow, infuriatingly, held the other half and all of the actual knowledge of how it worked. And into that resentment, that grief-shaped hole full of entitlement and contempt, walked Damon Vance. Damon Vance called himself a wealth consultant. What he actually was a predator who specialized in exactly Vanessa's situation, newly wealthy widows, grieving and angry and holding assets they did not understand. He had found her at a charity luncheon 3 months after the funeral, and he had been charming and attentive and full of concern, and he had told Vanessa what she most wanted to hear, which was that she was being cheated. He looked at Reyes and Reyes with its loyal, overpaid workforce and its handshake culture and its stubborn, old-fashioned builder of a co-owner, and he saw a company leaving money on the table everywhere, and he saw a way to take it. His pitch to Vanessa was simple and poisonous. Tomás, he suggested, was the problem. The old man was sentimental, inefficient, probably skimming, certainly holding her back. If they could get control, if they could remove Tomás and modernize, the company could be stripped down and sold for a fortune, and Vanessa could be rich in a way that Danny's slow, honest building had never made her. All they had to do was get the quiet brother out, and Damon had a plan for that. The plan was patient, and it was ugly, and it unfolded over almost a year while Tomás was still deep in grief and trusting everyone, because his brother had just died, and it did not occur to him, at first, that anyone would rob a man at a funeral. Damon, with Vanessa's access as co-owner, and her sister Renee brought in to help, began quietly moving money. They opened accounts Tomás was never told about. They set up a shell vendor, a fake subcontractor, and began routing company funds to it through invoices for work that never happened, wiring the money out and into accounts that traced back to Damon and Vanessa. And here was the truly vicious part, the part that revealed exactly what kind of man Damon Vance was. They did not just steal. They built a trail to make it look like Tomás was the one stealing. They used his position, forged his signature on documents he never saw, structured the theft so that when the day came to remove him, they could point to the missing money and say, with lawyers and paperwork to back them up, that the thief was Tomás. They were going to rob the company and pin it on the one man who had given his whole life to it. They were going to take his name, the name over the door, the name of his father and his brother, and turn it into the name of a criminal. For a long time it worked because Tomás was exactly the man they thought he was, in one respect. He trusted his family. He was busy doing what he had always done, running the actual work, keeping the actual promises, showing up at 6 in the morning to build the actual buildings. And he was not watching the books the way Danny used to, because that had been Danny's side of the wall. And Danny was gone. Vanessa handled more and more of the finances, with Damon at her elbow, and Tomás let her, partly out of grief, and partly out of a decent man's instinct to give his brother's widow a role, a purpose, a place. He handed them the keys to the vault out of kindness. They used his kindness as the cover for the robbery. But here is the thing about a man who has spent his whole life building. He may not watch the money, but he cannot unknow how a thing is supposed to fit together. And when something is off, when a joint is wrong, some part of him feels it before he can explain it. And Tomás started to feel it. Small things at first. A materials budget that did not match what he could see with his own eyes on the site. because Tomás knew to the board and the bag of cement what a job actually cost, and the numbers coming across his desk were wrong in ways that made no physical sense. A subcontractor he had never heard of, on invoices for a scope of work he knew for a fact his own crews had done. A vendor account with a name that meant nothing to a man who knew every real supplier in 3 counties by the owner's first name. Tomás could not have told you the accounting term for what he was seeing, but he was a builder, and he was looking at a building whose measurements did not add up, and every instinct in his body told him that somewhere a wall was hollow. He did not accuse anyone. That was not his way, and more importantly, it would have been the stupidest possible move, because if he had gone to Vanessa and said, "These numbers are wrong," he would only have warned the thieves and let them cover their tracks. Instead, Tomás Reyes did the thing that the people robbing him would never have predicted, because it required them to see him as something more than a hammer. He went home and he sat down with his daughter, Elena, the forensic accountant, and he laid out the strange numbers he could not explain, and he asked her to look, not to accuse, just to look. Elena looked, and within an evening her whole demeanor changed, because Elena did for a living exactly what someone had been counting on no one in Tomás's world being able to do. She followed the money. She saw the shell vendor immediately for what it was, a fiction. She traced the invoices to the wire transfers to the accounts, and she saw the pattern, the deliberate, careful pattern of a professional, and she understood in an hour something that chilled her to the bone. This was not sloppiness. This was not one person skimming. This was an organized, patient, professional theft, structured by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and it was being built into a frame around her father. She looked up from the laptop at Tomás and she said, "Papa, this isn't a mistake. Someone is stealing from you, and they're setting you up to take the blame." What Tomás felt in that moment was not rage, though the rage would come. It was grief, a second wave of it, because he finally understood that the family he had promised his dying brother he would protect was the family robbing him, and that Vanessa, Danny's Vanessa, the mother of Danny's memory, was in on it. For a night it nearly broke him. But then something harder set in, something that had been forged in him over 50 years of building things that had to hold weight, that could not be allowed to fail because people's lives would be inside them. Those workers, 40 families, the promise over the coffin. If Damon and Vanessa succeeded, if they stripped the company and sold it for parts, every one of those 40 families lost everything, and Danny's promise died, and Tomás's name became a criminal's name forever. Tomás Reyes decided quietly at his kitchen table that he was not going to let that happen, and he was not going to do it with noise or accusations or a lawsuit he could not afford against people with a professional criminal on their side. He was going to do it the way he did everything, carefully, completely, one piece at a time until the structure was so solid it could not be knocked down. So began the months of the folder. You have to understand the danger he was in, because it is easy to hear he gathered evidence and picture something calm. It was not calm. Tomás was going to work every single day and standing in rooms with the people robbing him, smiling, discussing schedules, playing the part of the grieving simple brother who suspected nothing, while underneath he was documenting their crime. One slip, one wrong glance, one moment where Vanessa or Damon sensed that the old man knew, and they would have moved immediately, destroyed records, accelerated the frame, maybe even had him removed on some pretext before he could finish building his case. So Tomás did the hardest thing a proud, wronged man can do. He pretended to be exactly as small as they thought he was. When Vanessa spoke to him like a servant in front of the staff, he took it. When Damon made his little jokes at the old builder's expense in meetings, Tomás gave a confused, humble smile and let them laugh. Every ounce of him wanted to stand up and roar the truth, and every day he swallowed it, because he understood that his anger was worth less than his evidence, and that the only way to protect 40 families was to keep being underestimated for just a little while longer. It is one of the hardest kinds of courage there is, the courage to look weak on purpose while you do the strongest thing of your life. It was a strange, secret, exhausting time, and Tomás carried it alone except for two people. The first was Elena, who worked nights and weekends running the forensic trail, documenting every transfer, every forged signature, every dollar, building the kind of airtight evidentiary record that her whole education had prepared her to build, never dreaming the case that would test her would be her own father's. And the second was Rosa, the company's bookkeeper, a woman in her 60s who had worked for the Reyes brothers for 20 years, who had loved Danny, who had watched Vanessa and Damon push her aside and bring in their own people, and who had noticed things she had been too frightened to say. When Tomás came to her quietly and told her what he suspected, Rosa wept with relief, because she had been carrying her own suspicions in terrified silence for months, afraid she would lose her job or worse. Rosa had kept copies. 20 years of loyalty and an old bookkeeper's instinct for keeping records had left a trail of her own, and she gave it all to Tomás. And it filled the gaps in Elena's forensic work with the human proof, the original documents, the things that showed not just that money had moved, but that it had been hidden on purpose. There was a night, about 2/3 of the way through, when it nearly all fell apart. Damon Vance was not a fool, and a professional predator has instincts, and he began to sense something. Maybe Rosa had been at the files too long one evening. Maybe Tomás had asked one question too many about a vendor. Whatever it was, Damon grew suspicious, and he moved to protect himself the way his kind always does, by trying to accelerate the timeline and by testing Tomás. He arranged for a surprise audit of Tomás's own project accounts, hoping to either rattle him or manufacture the very evidence of Tomás's embezzlement that the frame required. For one terrible week, Tomás felt the trap tightening around him faster than he could finish building his defense, and Elena begged him to go to the authorities now, immediately, with what they had. But Tomás, who had spent his life knowing when a structure was ready to bear weight and when it would still collapse, said no, not yet. Half a case is worse than no case, he told his daughter, because if you show them half, they patch the hole and you never get another look. He held his nerve. He let Damon's audit come, and because Tomás was in fact completely honest, because there was nothing real to find on his side, the audit found nothing, and Damon, reassured that the old man was clean and clueless, relaxed again. That relaxation was fatal. It bought Tomás the last few weeks he needed, and it taught him something he would say later. The truth is, the best armor a man can wear, because you can survive any audit when you have actually done nothing wrong. And then came the last piece, the piece that turned a financial case into an undeniable one, and it came from Damon and Vanessa's own arrogance. Because people who are certain they cannot be caught get sloppy, and they talk. Vanessa and Damon, so sure that the greasy-handed old builder would never understand what was happening to him, had been careless with their phones, careless with what they put in writing, and through a loyal employee who overheard too much and came to Tomás frightened, and through Rosa's access to shared systems that Damon had never bothered to lock down, because who would ever look? Tomás obtained the texts, the messages where they planned it, where Damon coached Vanessa on how to run the meeting, where they discussed in black and white, framing Tomás, structuring his removal for cause, and the timeline for selling the company once he was gone. They wrote down their whole crime because they were certain the only person it could ever hurt was too simple to read it. Tomás put it all in a folder. Bank summaries, the shell vendor, the wire transfers, the forged signatures side by side with his real one, Rosa's original records, the forensic trail Elena had built, and the texts. He organized it the way he organized a build, foundation first, then structure, then the roof, so that anyone who opened it would be walked step by step to a conclusion they could not escape. And he wrote one word on the front of it, in the black marker he used to label lumber. evidence. Then he waited. Because Tomás knew from the small tightening signs, from a certain confidence in Vanessa's manner, that they were almost ready to move, that the meeting to remove him was coming soon. He did not preempt it, he let them call it. He let them set the trap, walk into their glass conference room, prepare their document and their speech, and gather the whole board and the lawyers to witness the fall of Tomás Reyes. He let them build their moment, and then he brought the folder. You already know how the meeting began, with Vanessa's rehearsed speech and the document for Tomás to sign, and Damon standing behind her in his expensive suit, and Renee nodding along. You know that Tomás let her finish, and then opened the folder and slid the truth into the middle of the table in stacks. What you do not yet know is what happened next, in that glass room, once the pages were out and there was no putting them back. For a long moment, no one spoke. Vanessa stared at her own text messages on the table, and every drop of the confident contempt she had worn for a year drained out of her face and left something naked and terrified underneath. Renee started to cry, the panicked crying of someone who followed her sister into something and only now understood how far in she was. And Damon Vance, the professional, did what professionals do when the con collapses. He tried to control the room. He stood up straight and he smiled and he said, in his smooth voice, that this was a sad and desperate stunt by a man who was clearly not well, that these documents were obviously fabricated, that Tomás was doing exactly the kind of unstable thing that proved he needed to be removed, and that everyone should stay calm and not be manipulated by a bitter old man's forgeries. And that is when Tomás Reyes finally spoke, and he did not raise his voice because he had never in his life needed to. He looked at Damon and he said the thing that ended it. I thought you'd say that. So I didn't bring this to the meeting first. He let it sit for a second. I brought it to the district attorney's office 3 weeks ago. Everything in this folder is already with them. There are forensic accountants going through it right now, and they are not my daughter. They work for the county, and they have already confirmed the wire transfers and the shell vendor. I didn't come here today to convince you. He looked around the table, at the board members, at the lawyers, at Vanessa. I came here so that everyone in this room would know, before it's in the news, exactly who took the money, and exactly who they tried to blame. I built this company with my brother's name on the door. I wasn't going to let you turn his name into a thief's name. Not while I'm alive. Then he stood up, and he gathered his folder, because he had made copies. Of course he had made copies. A builder always keeps the plans. And he walked out of the glass room and left them sitting in the wreckage of their own scheme. There is a detail from that meeting that Rosa the bookkeeper told for years afterward, because it captured the whole man. After Tomás said his piece about the district attorney and stood to leave, one of the board members, an old friend of Danny's, asked him quietly why he had bothered to hold the meeting at all. Why he hadn't just let the police arrive one morning and take Vanessa and Damon away in front of everyone, the way they had planned to humiliate him. It would have been cleaner. It would have been sweeter. And Tomás stopped at the door and thought about it, and he said, because Danny's kids are going to grow up in this town, and someday they're going to read about their mother. I couldn't stop that, but I could make sure that on the day it happened, the last thing this company saw was me giving her the chance to stand up and walk out with whatever dignity she had left, instead of me dragging her out. I did it for them, not for her. Then he went home. That was the difference between Tomás Reyes and the people who tried to destroy him, laid bare in a doorway. Even in the hour of his total victory, he was still thinking about which children would have to live with the wreckage, and still choosing, as he had chosen every day of his life, the harder kindness over the easier cruelty. It came apart fast after that, the way a badly built thing comes apart once the first beam goes. Damon Vance, it turned out, had done versions of this before, to other widows, in other towns, and once the authorities had Thomas's folder and knew where to look, the whole pattern of Damon's career unraveled, and the con man who specialized in grieving women went to prison. where the smooth voice and the expensive suit did him no good at all. The stolen money, most of it, was recovered and returned to the company because Elena's forensic trail was precise enough to follow every dollar. And Tomás Reyes was not removed from Reyes and Reyes Construction. He remained exactly what he had always been, the man who built it, and now, without his brother, the man who ran all of it, and the 40 families kept their jobs, and Danny's promise held, because a Reyes was still in the company, and there was still a place for every one of them. Vanessa is the hard part of this story, because real life does not sort people into simple villains, and Tomás, to the surprise of everyone, did not destroy her the way he could have. She had been a genuine part of the theft, and she faced real consequences for it, legal ones she could not escape. But in the aftermath, when it all came out, it became clear that Vanessa had been, in her own way, another of Damon Vance's victims, a grieving and resentful woman he had found and shaped and steered, feeding her worst instincts until she did things she would spend the rest of her life ashamed of. She lost her share of the company, which was only right, since she had tried to steal it. But Tomás, standing over the ruins of his brother's marriage and his own trust, made a choice that told you everything about the difference between him and the people who had tried to bury him. He did not cut Vanessa out of the family entirely for the sake of Danny's memory, and he made sure that whatever happened to her, Danny's actual children, Tomás's niece and nephew, who were innocent of all of it, kept their uncle and kept their place in the world. He protected the children of the woman who had tried to destroy him, because they were his brother's blood, and because Tomás Reyes had made a promise over a coffin, and he was, above every other thing he was, a man who kept his promises even to people who had broken theirs. Elena Reyes became something of a legend in her field, quietly, the forensic accountant who took down a professional con artist to save her own father, and she came to work with her father after that, not swinging a hammer, but guarding the money the way he guarded the build, so that Reyes and Reyes would always have both halves again, the hands and the eyes, the way it had when there were two brothers. And Rosa, the old bookkeeper who had kept the records in secret and been too afraid to speak, was honored by Tomás in front of the whole company at the next Christmas party, told that her 20 years of quiet, careful loyalty had saved 40 families, and she cried, and every man in that room understood that they still worked for the kind of company that most people believe stopped existing a long time ago. And the company changed in a way that would have made Danny proud. Tomás, now holding the whole thing, did not become the kind of owner who forgets where he came from. He kept the handshake culture. He kept the promise. He gave the loyal old crews a share in what they had helped build, quietly, without a press release, because it was the right thing and because his brother would have wanted it. Reyes and Reyes went on, smaller for a while and then bigger than ever, and it stayed the strange old-fashioned thing it had always been. A company where the man at the top still showed up on the site at 6 in the morning, sometimes just to feel the work in his hands. The buildings kept going up. The name over the door stayed clean. Years later, a young reporter doing a story on the company asked Tomás Reyes how a builder with no financial training had managed to see through a scheme designed by a professional criminal. A scheme that had fooled lawyers and board members, and even the widow it was built around. And Tomás, older now, his brother's photo on the wall behind him, wiped his hands on a rag out of 50 years of habit, and gave the reporter the answer that hangs, framed, in the company office to this day. "They all made the same mistake," Tomás said. "They looked at my hands and decided that was all I was. They thought because I build with them, I can't see with them too. But every crooked wall starts with a lie in the measurements, and I have spent my whole life finding the lie in the measurements. They forgot the man who builds the house knows where every nail is. I knew this company was hollow somewhere long before I could prove it. I just had to find the empty space. Finding the empty space is the only thing I've ever been good at." He looked at his brother's photograph. "Danny sold the dream. I built it. And it turns out when someone tries to steal it, The one who built it is exactly the one who knows how to take it back. If you made it to the end of this one, think of the person in your life who does the real work, the quiet one, the one everybody underestimates. Tell them you see them. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And have you ever been underestimated by people who should have known better? I read every single one.